Hello, Dustin. First of all, I would like to thank you on behalf of everyone watching this right now for taking your time and sharing us with your insight on OKR. So before we begin, it would be great if you could kindly introduce yourself and your company to our audiences in Korea.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jake, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here in front of the audience. It's an exciting time, I think, for the OKR concept and for what OKRs can do for strategy execution, for people. You might see behind me, I work for Beroworks, and our mission is to help organizations close the loop between strategy, people, and results. So my name is Dustin Clinard. I work for Beroworks and I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts. So maybe 200 miles north of New York City in the Northeast of the US. Beroworks as a company is based in California. In fact, was based in California, but because of COVID, we acted quickly and we turned our California office into a remote office. And now we have a big office in New York City. But part of Beroworks mentality around agility and execution is based on John Doerr's OKR methodology. So for those of you who don't know, John Doerr is an investor in Beroworks. He's on our board, and he's a big reason why we do what we do. He popularized the OKR concept with his book, Measure What Matters, based on the work that he had done as an employee at Intel, as an investor at Kleiner Perkins, and working with companies like Google and Amazon and companies that have done well to adapt quickly while they grow fast. So it's a lucky position to work with such, somebody like John and such great people at Beroworks. So thanks again for having me, Jake.
All right, thank you so much, Dustin. So let's get right into it. I've already bombarded you with a lot of questions via email. So we've been seeing this big wave of OKR in Korea for the past 2-3 years, and especially based on the book that you've already mentioned that John Doerr wrote, Measure What Matters, right? So my first question naturally is, what is OKR coming from the original perspective? Because there might have been some stuff that's been lost in translation, So, what is OKR?
I mean, the OKR concept, and I can never paraphrase it quite as well as John could, but the OKR concept is one that allows organizations and teams to align around a focused set of objectives that will drive the business forward with speed and agility. It brings in a level of commitment as you commit to prioritize certain elements, which means you're not prioritizing other elements. And it creates a level of commitment and transparency around what we as an organization think is important, which is a difficult challenge sometimes. But once you get that right, it also allows teams and individuals to start to align around the most important things. If you think of people in executive roles, management roles, individual contributor roles, there's a lot of things that you could do, and having a well-running OKR model allows you to focus your time and energy on what really matters. And even in the past year with the pandemic, the US, I think, is maybe a little bit behind getting back to work than Korea. But for us, when you can't see people anymore, it's even more important to know that there's a shared set of focus, so that even if I don't know what you do while you're working, because you're probably at home with kids running around, we have a shared set of priorities. And I know that if we focus on advancing those, then we're going to be better off as a business. So at its core, that's what OKRs are about.
Right. Setting the objective and getting everyone aligned up to that objective. All right, great. So we do have a pretty good grasp of what it is in Korea here as well. But, with such cultural differences, the first problem that we encounter in Korea is that link between OKR and employee evaluation.
Yeah.
we're so used to using just KPIs, measuring KPIs to answer questions such as, have you performed or have you excelled?
Yep.
So what is the best way to use OKR for evaluation? Is there a bridge for the traditional way of employee evaluation or incentive systems, for that matter?
Yeah, it's a as you've experienced, I'm sure it's a tricky question because one of the principles, if you read John Doerr's book or you listen to him talk, a component of OKRs is this concept of stretching. And if you link OKR progress directly to performance evaluations, you run a very serious risk of having the concept of sandbagging. And so a performance evaluation, typically, whether it's a rating or there's a compensation or money or whatever, if I link it directly to that, then what I want to do as an individual is typically set an easier goal. And if I set an easier goal so that I can achieve that goal to unlock a pay or promotion, then I'm not setting the goal that's best for the organization. Right. And so I think our first piece of advice would be, don't link OKR progress directly to performance management or performance evaluation. And by directly, I mean, if you achieve an OKR, you get a better rating. That is a recipe that may not end well. I think the concept of an OKR, if you take into account how an objective ended at the end of a quarter, how the key results contributed to that objective. In the John Doerr model, there's also conversations that we have, feedback that we get, recognition that we give and get. If I look at all of those things across, say, a 12-month period, I now have a number of data points that are actually reflective of my performance, how my objectives ended up, how people saw my contribution to those objectives. COVID was another good example. I could have objectives that were set in January of 2020 and were literally impossible to hit because a certain market got shut down. And that is, in all fairness, out of most individuals' hands. And so things like that have to be taken into account. So we advocate for OKRs holistically. So all of the elements of OKRs and CFRs are part of the how did I perform as an individual. Most organizations that we work with, most of our customers will take that as one data point, but they'll have other factors like leadership style or my contribution to values as an organization. And they might weight them differently, but they'll take them all into account when doing a performance evaluation. It's tricky, as I'm sure you've seen.
It is. We're seeing a lot of, there's mismatch, from getting the ideal side of OKR and actually applying and adopting it. And we, inevitably face this performance review and employee evaluation. So your insight, gives us a lot of this idea of what to do and how to navigate OKR through it.
Well, there's one more. I think if you think of the other side, if you think of it from the performance review side, one complaint we'll often hear from our business customers, our business leaders, the P&L leaders or the line of business leaders, is that the performance review is not as relevant for them as a business leader because it's based on goals that were set in a different context. And so if you have an evaluation that's based on one set of goals and then a business that operates on a different set of goals, it's like running two systems, and most companies don't have the resource to run two separate systems. So the benefit of figuring out how they work together is that you have HR who can run a performance evaluation process that's respected by the business, and the business is contributing goals that are meaningful to support the HR process. So it works. Our best customers have both the business side and the HR side involved and communicating with each other. It can work a little bit either way, but it works best at an organizational level when everybody's on the same page.
Right, great. So then oftentimes we see this, mismatch, just like, the performance review, and which, isn't any different when it comes to people. So we appoint leaders, and there are times that they don't perform as well. They don't perform as well as you expected.
Yeah.
So how should you deal with a scrum leader or a team leader who is underperforming? And what strategies should you use in terms of managing an organization with those leaders?
Yeah, I think you do find various levels of adoption with OKRs and with a lot of change that happens in businesses. And I think there's three ways to think about it, which is the difference between the skill set, the willingness, and maybe the third one would be the belief. So sometimes we'll find leaders who don't have the skill set to be good at communicating. They want to be good communicators, but they don't really have the communication skills. They didn't learn it. They never worked for somebody like that. We have others who they lack the will. They don't see the need for this type of coordination, and they're happy working in their silo. And that happens in some functions. I think the third thing, which is one that OKRs and especially the CFR side can really support, is the idea of belief. I'm not as familiar with the Korean labor market, but people typically have choices where they can work. And if you are in sales or product or design or engineering, you can do that in a lot of different companies. So why do I want to do it at this company? And that's where the belief comes in. And so we've seen Scrum masters, team leaders, executives get pulled along if you can build a sense of belief. And the concept of an OKR, again, forces that. Sometimes we refer to it as the North Star. It forces this, where are we all going? If we have 10 employees, 100 employees, 1,000 employees, 10,000 employees, where are we going becomes our North Star, and it builds a sense of belief.
Right.
If at that point in time you don't have the belief, maybe it's better to do it somewhere else. But if you can build the belief, many people tend to appreciate where the business is trying to achieve. It's the bigger purpose, so to speak.
So the North Star.
The North Star
should be the central point of applying OKR and getting everyone to really look in the same direction, right?
Yeah. If you think of all of the different things that a business does at any given time, OKRs don't replace every process, and they don't replace every KPI. In manufacturing, you have health and safety KPIs. You cannot get away from those. The question is, what makes a good OKR? And that is often where we're driving towards. You may have heard the KPI OKR analogy expressed in the form of a GPS, right? A KPI is kind of where you are on a map, and the OKR is where you're going towards. So your GPS moves you towards a direction. So you need to have a direction, but you want to stay on the road. And the KPIs are kind of the road. Don't go off the road. But once you're on the road, what direction are you heading is where the OKR can help drive you. North Star is just an arbitrary direction.
Right. All right, great. Such great answers. Thank you so much.
Of course.
So now we asked some of our participants if they had any questions for you. And well, now is the time to answer them. So Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome. All right. The first two questions are about adopting OKR. So the first question is that in Korea, companies in the tech industry seem to have an edge when it comes to adopting OKR. However, industries on the other end of the spectrum, such as manufacturing industry, those experience difficult times doing the same thing. And we think that this difference between industries can probably be seen in the US as well. So which industries in the US seem to have an advantage in adopting OKR, and which industry has, a little bit harder time? And what was the key to coaching these industries have harder time to adopt OKR well?
If you think of the cultural ask that an OKR model will place on an organization that isn't used to it, it does require a decent amount of change from the CEO, from the executive team, all the way through the organization. So that would imply that companies that are in the midst of a big change, their industry is going through a big change, or they're leaders in change. That's how we think of the best industries. So tech, as you said, is some tech, big tech, the big tech firms that have been around for a while are often constantly going through change. So they make good candidates for OKRs. Newer tech companies, startups, or emerging high growth tech, they're naturally change. They're trying to change something in the industry. So they're a good candidate for OKRs. Other industries that we see here, biotech is a really good industry. Biotech generally is trying to change the delivery of medicines or drugs or whatever, life sciences. Pharma, on the other hand, is a little bit further behind. Part of the reason for that is big pharma tends to be bigger and going through a bigger transformation. So we'll see a pharma organization go through an agile transformation, as an example. And on the back of that, there'll often be the demand for OKRs. Most companies, bigger companies here, will use it in pockets. But what I'm talking about is for an organizational demand to use something like that. Similar with certain financial services companies. I think there's a lot of pressure on consumer banking right now. There's a lot of pressure on the insurance industry right now. So those older industries tend to be good candidates for OKRs also, because they're trying to reinvent themselves in the wake of a lot of startups that are pressuring their business models. Other industries like manufacturing is a little bit, it depends. If a manufacturing company has a solid market to themselves and they have good margins, it might not be a great candidate for OKRs because there isn't the pressure to do something different. At the same time, automotive here, for example, or transportation companies here, airlines, automotive, they're facing a lot of pressure from all kinds of competitors. And so we find those can be maybe a little bit behind tech, but are good candidates for OKRs also. So it's probably not too different than what you see in Korea. Our belief is that everybody will be ready for OKRs at some point, relatively soon. That is also our hope and belief.
Right. It's also our hope and our belief as well. So, but from what you've said right now, it seems like industry. It depends on which industry. That might be a factor, but the bigger factor is there a will to change? Is there a will to really reinvent and go through something new, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think the organization's appetite for change and willingness to adopt something different is definitely the number one factor. It can happen in industry, in any industry. We have hundreds of customers at BetterWorks, and they do span all industries. There are some industries that tend to be more prevalent, but everyone is involved in some way, and it depends on your ability. Think about the OKR as something where I can transparently look up what some other business leader has identified as their main priorities. Rewind 10 years, and there was nowhere to look for that. You would see it in a financial report, or you would see it at a board meeting or a company presentation. But I often couldn't look up, what are the goals of this person, or what is the OKR this person's department is working on. And so it creates a level of transparency, which is in the long run, very, very good for everyone. In the short run can be scary for some leaders. So if you have a leadership team who they want transparency, but they're not willing to give it, you might find a little bit more resistance. You'll find other leaders who are more than happy laying their cards on the table, and that'll be an organization that's a good fit for change.
All right. So the key is that willingness to change and adopt.
Absolutely.
We see it, across the industry in Korea as well. That willingness from the leaders, to the team members as well. Their willingness to adopt, their willingness to change. It really makes a difference.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Right. Awesome. We also had many questions regarding the sprint planning, and those meetings. So the first question about it is, what is the most ideal way of organizing a sprint meeting or sprint planning. For example, what kind of setting, what kind of environment is the best? How long should it be? Things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that we see in sprint planning and team meetings and strategy meetings, maybe the number one thing is make them forward-looking. Don't ask for reflections. Don't ask for status updates. Reflections can be okay, but status updates are a waste of people's times. If you're using the OKR model in any way, what you'll know is where you're going and how you are on the road to get there. And so then you can use it as how confident are we to get to where we said we would by whatever period of time we're looking at, and what is in our way, or what do we anticipate potentially getting in the way? And those are forward-looking conversations. Frequency, I think it depends. Some organizations can, if it's an engineering to develop a development team, they might have daily 5 or 10 minute stand-ups. If it's a sales team, it might be once a week. If it's a product management team, they might be meeting more frequently on different topics, but the how are we doing on OKRs might be every other week. So our cadence is typically a bi-weekly cadence, but the assumption that we're making is there's a lot of other things happening in the middle. The purpose to stop specifically and talk about the OKR progress is a little bit less frequent than some of the other meetings we might have. Operational meetings separated from OKR meetings, so to speak.
So we shouldn't focus too much on the progress of OKR, for meetings purposes, but instead we should probably do a frequent checkup on what's going on, and then do a bi-weekly.
Yeah, if you think about the construction of an OKR, they're not OKRs are not designed to be tasks,
right?
And so you aren't completing something every single day. So if you have a daily OKR meeting, it may not be that different from one day to the next, even though you are completing a lot of tasks. So whether it's a week or 2 weeks or once a month, you do need to give some time for the results to be evident. Now, results can be measured in a lot of different ways. They can be big results, or they can be, smaller results. But you need to have enough time where all of these tasks can say, okay, I did 15 things last week, and it resulted in the following. And that's the frequency in which to start to set up the structure. It will depend on teams and how often they reasonably can achieve something, so to speak. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Next question about the sprint meeting is, most of the times in Korea, there's a sprint planning on Mondays, and reviews on Fridays. But as a consulting company, we sometimes encounter clients requesting help on Wednesdays, or days other than Mondays for a checkup.
Yeah.
A little help on, so what are your thoughts and suggestions on what the consultant should do or should focus on when he or she goes in to do these checkups for clients and their sprint plannings?
Yeah. The consulting question is a really interesting one. I think, the client is often right, but sometimes the client is not always right. And so the question is, the frequency can depend on the need. So having a cadence to things is a comfortable thing. We know that Mondays we do one thing, and on Fridays we do something else. Although in this case, I'd focus more on the need for a review of our plan. And if that is on a Wednesday, then we should have the meeting on a Wednesday. An example of this could be last year, most organizations do their OKRs on a quarterly basis. That's kind of the default, although it can depend on different teams. Some are sprint oriented, some are multi-year oriented, but quarterly is probably the most common mechanism. So in 2020, here in the US, COVID became a thing in March. when people started staying home. But April had already happened by the time people realized the impact that was really going to happen from COVID. Mm-hmm. And so April is the beginning of Q2. Second quarter plans, OKRs were set. And by the end of April, companies started realizing, things are not going back to normal anytime soon. And so at that point in time, you have a plan. Our cadence was quarterly. So do we let the next 2 months go and then readjust, or do we readjust right now? And if you let those 2 months go, you've pretty much wasted 2 months. And so the need at that point in time was to stop and reevaluate based on the knowledge that we have, what should our OKRs be? And if it means scrapping some, because we can't go see customers anymore, then we scrap it. So that's a different time frame than your question, Monday through Friday. But I think the principle applies, which is there a need to revisit the OKR, or do we need Wednesday to be a tactical session or an execution oriented session to try to clear roadblocks, let's say.
So focus more on goals rather than on time.
Goals and the need for execution-oriented discussions versus a planning-oriented discussion or something like that.
All right. Okay, great. That answered a lot of different questions that I asked. So I guess we could jump right into the last question. We say that CFR is the engine for OKR. It's very important. And so what are your tips on, simulating or stimulating CFRs? How do you stimulate or teach a leader to be an expert at CFR?
First of all, I love the fact that you value the CFR, because of the OKR. It's not mechanical, but there is a mechanism to OKRs to some degree. Blindly following the mechanism doesn't tend to result in what you were expecting. And the CFRs are a really important concept as we go through things. It gets into the concept of leadership, of communication, of encouragement. And I think it becomes a really, really important point to get us through our OKR planning and our OKR feedback. So what that means, though, is every leader's communication style is a little bit different. And it's important to understand and to coach leaders around effective communication, effective listening, maybe importantly, how do we have a quality conversation? And if you have quality conversations, you have embodied kind of the concept of the CFR. Now, the conversation in the C is often between me and you. It's peer-to-peer, or it's manager to team, or manager to leader, or something like that. The feedback needs to be done in a candid way. And what I mean by feedback is anybody can get feedback. Anybody can get feedback or receive feedback. Anybody can give feedback, including a CEO, senior leaders. And so now think of what we talked about a few minutes ago. Culturally, is this an organization where the CEO is open to feedback from people several levels below? Some organizations are ready for that. Some organizations are not. So the adoption of the CFRs does have something to do with how ready an organization is. Recognition is similar. Are we a recognition heavy organization? Generally speaking, we found that more recognition or purposeful recognition centered around a value, centered around an accomplishment is a highly useful thing. But that ties back to the belief. Do we have belief in our colleagues that we are all working towards a common goal? So the coaching, I think, to your question, diagnosing a leader's ability to coach, to listen, and to be constructive with feedback is the most important thing for someone to get the CFR part operating efficiently. And it is so key to unlocking the power of OKRs, as you mentioned.
So we need to be able to really know, what kind of leader he is or she is, in order to really, stimulate and have that CFR engine kind of run really well in an organization, right?
Yeah, which is, it's not always natural for every leader. Not every leader is not used to that. And so that's where your work comes in, and coaching work comes in, encouraging this type of candid conversation. The nice part is back to the first point you made, this is not our conversations are not a performance review of you as an individual. They are about an objective that we collectively as an organization said was important, and we want to move it forward. So to do that with transparency, open conversations, candid conversations, listening to feedback, that becomes so important for us as a company. And so, the more that happens at the CFR level, so to speak, the more likely we are to have OKR accomplishment the way we want to. So,
All right, great. Thank you so much for all the great answers, Dustin. I'm pretty sure my English wasn't really clear, or my speech wasn't as clear as well. But thank you so much.
Your English was perfect. So thanks for having me.
All right. So, that's it for the questions that we have for you. But Dustin, if you have any last words that you would like to leave with, now's your time.
All I can say is that the concept of OKRs it's a journey. It's like building a muscle. If you go to the gym, if you want to get stronger, the first step is to go to the gym. But going to the gym doesn't make you stronger. Going to the gym every day or a couple times a week for a period of months or years, that's what makes you stronger. So the OKR concept is like that. You have to get started. You have to do something. But once you do it, it's going to be difficult some days, or you're going to feel like you're not motivated some days. And then other days you're going to feel really strong and it's really working. And the idea of give it time to go through it, that is one parting thought. The concept of starting is like going to the gym for the first time. It's the right move, and you should definitely do it. And I appreciate what you're doing and what your audience is doing to if they're not already doing it. I think many organizations are, but if they're not, it's a great movement that we expect to be globally, continue to grow. So,
right.
Thank you again.
All right. Thank you so much. And, I truly hope that soon we'll be able to meet in person and have a little bit, more talk. Like that.
I hope so as well. Let's create an OKR around that. Maybe we can.
Let's do that. All right. Thank you so much, Dustin.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Jake. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.